I think she would do really well. Basically, she did do that in our movie.
I feel like what you do in the movie is exactly what I must.
Peter Dinklage's remarks landed like a seismic shockwave through Disney, igniting a controversy that many insiders believe could end up costing the studio well over $100 million. What began as a routine live-action remake quickly spiraled into one of the most divisive projects in Disney's modern history. Reports that the studio had altered or outright removed the iconic dwarfs only fueled the backlash, turning what should have been a nostalgic return to a beloved fairy tale into a flashpoint for cultural debate. Disney has always known that touching a story as sacred as Snow White would provoke strong reactions, but few could have predicted just how explosive the response would become. From the moment the film was announced, audiences split into deeply entrenched camps. Some welcomed the idea of reimagining the classic for a new generation, believing the story needed updating to remain relevant in today's world. Others feared that excessive modernization would erase the very elements that made the 1937 animated film timeless. As these debates raged online, the situation grew increasingly volatile, evolving into a chaotic mix of studio damage control, fan outrage, and accusations flying in every direction. Many longtime fans argued that the controversy could have been avoided entirely if Disney had stayed closer to the original formula, keeping the prince as an important figure, preserving the dwarfs as they were, and focusing on storytelling rather than messaging. Instead, critics began asking a dangerous question. Had Disney's attempt to appear progressive actually pushed the film towards self-destruction? The backlash intensified as rumors spread of troubled test screenings, internal disagreements, and last-minute creative changes. Industry insiders whispered about rising budgets, delayed timelines, and executives scrambling behind the scenes. By the time media outlets openly labeled the situation the Snow White disaster, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. What was once seen as a guaranteed box office success now looked increasingly like a cautionary tale. How did a project backed by one of the most powerful studios in entertainment unravel so dramatically? And why do some claim this may be the darkest chapter in Snow White's long adaptation history? The controversy deepened when Disney announced that rising star Rachel Zegler would take on the role of Snow White. The news spread rapidly, instantly reigniting heated discussions across social media and entertainment circles. Peter Dinklage's comments soon followed, carrying enormous influence due to his visibility and the power of television platforms. His criticism of portraying 7 characters with dwarfism in a traditional way struck a nerve, forcing Disney into an uncomfortable spotlight. While some praised the remarks as long overdue, others accused the studio of overcorrecting and sidelining actors with dwarfism rather than creating meaningful opportunities for them. At first glance, Zegler's casting seemed like a safe bet. She had the vocal talent, the screen presence, and a rapidly growing fan base. Supporters viewed her as a fresh face who could breathe new life into the iconic role and usher Snow White into a modern era. But opposition formed almost immediately. Critics argued that her casting clashed with the character's traditionally German-inspired origins and symbolized a broader shift away from the source material. As debates intensified, it became increasingly clear that the uproar wasn't just about one actress, it was about trust. Fans questioned whether Disney still respected its own legacy. In Hollywood, few voices carry as much influence on representation as Peter Dinklage. Known for rejecting roles that reduce dwarf characters to tired cliches, he has long pushed the industry to treat marginalized groups with more care and respect. So when Dinklage publicly criticized the portrayal of the dwarfs in Disney's Snow White remake, the studio could no longer ignore the issue or simply wait for the outrage to fade. He openly questioned why a centuries-old fairy tale trope was being revived at all, mocking what he described as Disney's fake progressivism and warning that the film risked reinforcing outdated and offensive stereotypes. Coming at a time when Rachel Zegler had just been cast as Snow White, his remarks landed with explosive force. For a studio already under intense scrutiny over diversity and representation, Dinklage's comments were like a jolt of electricity. Almost immediately, rumors began circulating about major script rewrites. Behind the scenes, executives reportedly panicked over the potential backlash and demanded sweeping changes, some so drastic that even people working on the production struggled to keep track. What may have started as a carefully planned reimagining quickly morphed into an urgent scramble to avoid stepping on what many feared was a cultural landmine. The film was no longer just about storytelling, it was about damage control. As the controversy spread, fans fractured into multiple camps. Some praised Dinklage for standing up against what they saw as outdated portrayals, applauding his willingness to challenge Disney directly. Others accused him of interfering with a beloved story and argued that removing the dwarfs altogether would actually reduce opportunities for actors with dwarfism. In that moment, the live-action Snow White ceased to be just a movie and became a cultural flashpoint. Tensions ran so high that even the smallest comment, whether from critics, fans, or industry insiders, sparked fierce reactions online. Disney, meanwhile, appeared determined to brand Snow White as its most progressive remake yet. Casting a Latina actress in the lead role? Check. Reworking potentially problematic elements of the original story? Check. Emphasizing female empowerment, independence, and modern values? Absolutely. But insiders whispered that each new update felt rushed rather than carefully considered. The production reportedly went through multiple script revisions while filming was already underway, forcing cast members to reshoot scenes and adjust to sudden tonal shifts. What should have been a cohesive vision instead began to feel patched together on the fly. Test audiences were eventually brought in, but many only saw fragments of a film that felt unfinished and confused. Feedback was reportedly mixed at best and harsh at worst. Viewers complained that the storyline lacked consistency, that the modern messaging felt clumsy, and that the film didn't seem sure whether it belonged to a classic fairy tale era or a contemporary social commentary. The identity of the movie itself appeared uncertain. Suddenly, Rachel Zegler found herself at the center of the storm. Whether she wanted the spotlight or not, her continued silence turned her into a magnet for criticism. The production's early promise of a smooth, empowering retelling was rapidly dissolving, replaced by non-stop speculation and suspicion. Viewers began asking an uncomfortable question. If the movie was struggling this badly, why hadn't its lead actress stepped in to clarify anything? Some argued she was powerless, boxed in by studio contracts and internal politics, while others began to suspect she was quietly complicit in creative decisions they believed had derailed the project. What followed was an avalanche of think pieces, YouTube breakdowns, and relentless social media takedowns. Disney's attempts at damage control appeared hesitant and unfocused, as though the studio itself couldn't decide which narrative to push or who should shoulder the blame. Beneath the surface, speculation about responsibility grew louder. The tension escalated even further when rumors began circulating that Zegler privately blamed Peter Dinklage for much of the film's turmoil. According to unverified whispers, she believed his outspoken criticism had frightened studio executives, triggering a wave of drastic late-stage changes that fundamentally altered the film.
In the middle of my answer? Like, are you serious?
Scenes were reportedly reshot or scrapped entirely. Characters were reimagined in ways that disrupted continuity and muddied the story's core. Fans seized on this alleged behind-the-scenes blame game and ran with it. Was Zegler searching for a scapegoat to deflect attention from a failing script? Or had Dinklage's initial critique truly set off a domino effect of panic inside Disney? Nothing was ever confirmed, but the narrative took on a life of its own. To many observers, the studio's response felt extreme, almost as if one comment suggesting the seven dwarfs were problematic led to the conclusion that the safest solution was to remove them altogether, even if that meant eliminating representation rather than improving it. For some, it was easier to pin the chaos on a single spark than to confront the messy reality of a production pulled in too many directions at once. Longtime Disney fans were quick to point out that the issues extended far beyond the dwarfs. The film's tone swung wildly, shifting from lighthearted fantasy to heavy-handed moral lessons without warning. The storyline lurched between comedy and commentary, with forced messaging often overshadowing the natural whimsy and emotional warmth that defined the original classic. Yet, despite these broader problems, the rumor that Zegler resented Dinklage's influence refused to fade. That rumor ignited fresh rounds of online warfare, reopening a much larger debate about whether Hollywood can modernize classic fairy tales without alienating significant portions of its audience. When opening day finally arrived, the film collapsed under the weight of brutally low expectations. Reviews ranged from lukewarm to outright scathing. Critics tore into the uneven plot, the clumsy attempts at updating Snow White's story, and the unmistakable signs of last-minute recalibration. While some reviewers praised Zegler's performance and acknowledged a handful of visually striking moments, the overall verdict was clear: Disney had missed the mark. Talk of a second Snow White adaptation, this time with fresh faces and a more carefully considered creative direction, sent the fandom into yet another frenzy of speculation. Names were immediately floated, with some fans championing Jenna Ortega as an ideal choice, praising her commanding screen presence and ability to balance darkness with vulnerability. But looming over every new suggestion was the shadow of the previous fiasco, a controversy so consuming it had dominated headlines for months. The memory of the Snow White disaster proved impossible to shake, serving as a warning that even Disney, with all its resources and legacy, was not immune to creative collapse. In the aftermath, Hollywood insiders quietly began referring to the project as the ultimate cautionary tale. This was not a film anyone set out to sabotage. It was a multi-million-dollar production born from ambition and good intentions, yet it unraveled into a patchwork of frantic course corrections. Those close to the situation pointed to a perfect storm of factors: relentless pressure to appeal to modern audiences, an overwhelming fear of offending any group, and a reactive approach that attempted to incorporate every new wave of feedback, even when those changes disrupted the story's coherence. Instead of strengthening the film, each adjustment diluted its identity. The deeper lesson, many argued, was that genuine progressiveness cannot be achieved through panic-driven rewrites. Meaningful representation requires foresight, consistency, and confidence, not impulsive decisions made after controversy erupts. By the time Disney attempted to recalibrate, the foundation was already unstable. The rumored tension between Rachel Zegler and Peter Dinklage became a symbol of this broader breakdown, illustrating how quickly a single comment can snowball into an industry-wide crisis in an era of non-stop connectivity. What began as a critique about representation morphed into a chain reaction of studio overcorrections, each one compounding the last. Debate still rages over whether Dinklage's remarks pushed Disney to confront a legitimate issue or inadvertently triggered a spiral of excessive caution that ultimately damaged the film beyond repair. Fans and critics alike continue to wrestle with that question, just as the industry struggles with a larger dilemma: how to modernize vintage fairy tales without stripping them of their soul. Some argue that a truly inclusive adaptation would have expanded opportunities for actors with dwarfism, giving those characters depth and dignity rather than sidelining them in a rushed attempt to avoid backlash. Others believe the entire storyline needed a ground-up reimagining from the very beginning, not a hodgepodge of late-stage fixes layered onto a shaky framework. Whether or not Rachel Zegler ever explicitly blamed Peter Dinklage, the Snow White disaster left a permanent mark on Disney's live-action strategy. Years from now, when audiences debate the most successful and most disastrous remakes, this adaptation will almost certainly resurface as a grim reminder of how even a promising idea can fail when internal vision collides with external pressure. It forces an unsettling question for all future remakes. Is it possible to deliver a progressive retelling of a beloved classic without alienating fans and descending into chaos? Chaos?